Alrighty, welcome back for another episode of Two Plane Sports. Today is another day. We're at the end of January, about to be February. Unfortunately, we've only got one football game left at this point, one NFL game, the Super Bowl, and then we are full in on off season for all of football. So today we're going to be talking recruiting. Seems to be a popular topic right now. OU picking up a recent commitment through the transfer portal, and then also OU just had a recruiting weekend the previous weekend, but now they've got another one coming up this weekend. So who's there, who's not there? We're going to talk a handful of players, but not everyone in this video. But before we get into it, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. We did hit 6,200. We're over 6,200 subscribers, so shout out to you guys. So we hit that benchmark, but we're on to the next one, brick by brick, right? So we're going for 6,300 now. So if you're new here, hit the subscribe button. It's free and easy. Like the video, turn the notification bell on so you know when we post videos. And if you have been following us for a while, you've noticed that we haven't been doing our Tuesday live streams, and we kind of forgot to mention this, but we're going to kind of halt those for right now and do those periodically in the off season. But obviously, we'll pick up whenever the football season is back in full swing because content's a little bit slower and a little bit kind of hit or miss in the off season. So we'll do periodic live streams, but we'll just give you some heads up on that. And then follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Apple, Spotify, and TikTok. Everything's linked in the description below. So we'll just just talk about it quickly. Is Oklahoma picked up another offensive lineman through the transfer portal in Jarian Hatchett from Washington. We talked about him quite a bit. I don't think we need to really break down his type of play and anything like that, but Oklahoma goes 1 for 2 on the brothers, the Hatchet brothers. You get Jarian, who has a ton of playing experience. He's got 2 years of eligibility left. He brings in more stability in the offensive line. Coach B had to go to the transfer portal to totally rebuild this offensive line to immediately play. There's young talent, but you infuse it with some talent that's played elsewhere. You start to feel a little bit better that at least you've got the talent there. Brandon, do you have any quick thoughts on Jarian Hatchett? I mean, I feel a little bit better about where this offensive line is compared, say, 2 months ago.
100%. I mean, I think he's the guy that's going to come in and at least push for a starting spot. I feel like he's going to end up starting. It also just shows that we don't always know what we're talking about on the show because we thought it was a package deal, and we thought they were both Sooners for sure. So you win some, you lose some, but definitely a big get for that offensive line. Big get for Coach B. Very excited to see what he can bring to the Sooners.
Definitely solidifies the future, at least for the next couple of years. We'll see how that guard competition works out too. I think going into this year, we're all pretty high on Eddie Pierre-Louis. Eugene Brooks has really shown out over the off-season camps. Then you bring in Fabecki into the fold as a transfer as well to play guard. You have guys that have been on the roster that I'm assuming could translate to playing guard, even though most of them were tackles at the high school level. It's going to be a lot of competition. That is much needed because that guard play last year wasn't the best.
It was definitely not the best. Up and down and, inconsistent. But at the end of the day, Oklahoma, they had a glaring need and they went to the transfer portal, and that's what you have to use it for. Obviously, it's not the ideal scenario, but it is what it is, and they did the best they could, and while still maintaining their principles and what they're willing to do and what they weren't willing to do in the NIL. And I just want to speak just on the NIL. Man, there are a lot of programs now that are starting to get in some hot water with NIL. And I know, I don't really want to go down this whole road and make a whole podcast about it, but it is interesting that we, for the last year plus 2 years or whatever, when the NIL has really become a big deal, you kind of have an idea of who the programs are, the big players and the ones that are willing to throw the big dollars and kind of do things maybe that are unethical or against the rules. And it seems like things are starting to catch up with programs, and it typically does. It takes a year, 18 months sometimes for some of these things to come to light. And at the end of the day, I know Oklahoma, it can be frustrating that, why didn't Oklahoma go get the player, this player to do this for this X amount of money? At the end of the day, there's a reason why they didn't. And they're looking at the program down the line and, all these punishments and what Florida State's dealt with and what could Tennessee deal with in Florida. And it just goes to show that I think they know what they're doing. And, I know it might be frustrating in the minute, in the time, but I just thought that was interesting. I got the notification about Tennessee earlier today. So it's interesting. You guys have any thoughts on that?
It's all surrounding the quarterback too, which we'll see if he gets punished at all, or if they'll just force him to transfer. 'Cause if anything comes up of it during the offseason, it'll be interesting how it's handled, because it's the first time they're actually going to do something about an NIL situation and not just the recruiting infraction like they did with Coach Harbaugh and the cheeseburger.
Yeah, the cheeseburger.
The good old cheeseburger.
Yeah, cheeseburgers will get you.
Man's got to
anyway,
eat.
Yeah, man's got to eat. All right, Smokey. Anyway, we'll talk about this recruiting weekend that Oklahoma's got. So they've got back-to-back recruiting weekends. This weekend is not necessarily quite as big, at least reportedly, what it seems like from previous weekend, but it's going to still host a lot of talent, or is supposed to host a lot of talent. So we'll get into it. So the first guy we're going to be talking about is 2025 four-star wide receiver Cooper Perry, the number one player from the state of Arizona, where Jose currently resides, down in Scottsdale, Arizona. So literally right down the road from Jose. Four-star player. He's got a total, this past 2 years as a sophomore and a junior. It's just ridiculous what he's put together. He's got 150 catches for almost 2,300 yards and 38 touchdowns in the receiving end. So I would say that's rather productive and rather good. Being at 6'1", 185, he recently received a crystal ball in favor of Oregon. Literally just this past weekend, he was down in doing some 7-on-7s and stuff, and it seems like Oregon's applying some pressure, and rightfully so. They typically recruit well on the West Coast and kind of in the Arizona region. Jose, what do you think?
Yeah, Brandon and I talked about him shortly after he was offered by Oklahoma in a video a couple weeks ago now, and we came out of that, of watching his huddle, thinking that he is an underrated player and someone that people are gonna say sneaky athletic, the classic, wide receiver tropes, lunch pail guy, first one in, last one out situation. But he's
High
just
motor.
a good football player. Yeah, like he's someone that at the wide receiver position can be very productive wherever he goes. Now, like you mentioned, Oregon's going to be a tough one to beat, because you would assume this is like USC country when it comes to recruiting, but Oregon really seems to be more of a presence down here. I know ASU, they're in Micah Dillingham are really trying to solidify in-state recruiting, at least from the outside looking in, more so than the University of Arizona at the moment. They're just having a tough time. I don't know. They can't sell kids on staying here and going to Tempe as much as like Texas schools have been able to do so, or Oklahoma has been able to do so. But Cooper Perry is someone that if you end up landing him, and him being the last, the fourth or the last, whatever that situation is like, in getting wide receiver recruits in the 2025 class, you're gonna be very happy with what he brings to the table. Now, I don't know if he does commit to Oklahoma, because Oklahoma's also recruiting a lot of other guys. Isaiah Mosey's someone that people for a while now, especially insiders, have expected to be part of this class. At this point, that doesn't seem very likely with how things have changed over the last few months, but you never know. It's recruiting. Things can change on a whim, but Cooper Perry would definitely be one that I'd be happy to get out of the state of Arizona, which would be back-to-back years of getting a top player out of the state.
Yeah, for sure. I was about to mention he's the top player in the state. It would be awesome to go back-to-back, getting the top player in Arizona. The stats jump off the page, Ibram. You read them off. 150 catches over the past 2 years, 2,300 yards, 38 touchdowns. When we first talked about him last week, we mentioned Notre Dame as what we thought would be a big thorn in our side here, because he goes to Notre Dame prep or whatever. He's also a lax player, so we thought maybe he can have the opportunity to play, lax and football at Notre Dame, which he wouldn't have anywhere else. But with him being crystal ball to Oregon, it appears as if that lacrosse thing is not something that really is weighing heavy on his decision here, because I don't think Oregon plays lacrosse either. So, hopefully Oklahoma can start to swing him in the right direction, because he would be a pretty fun get for OU.
It seems like obviously he does have interest in Oklahoma, but when you start looking at what this wide receiver room has already put together in the 2025 class, you already have 3 guys committed. You got Jaden Nickens, Elijah Thomas, and Grayson Harris, already all committed to you right now. And the wide receiver room is a position of strength on this current Oklahoma roster. And Oklahoma last weekend hosted Caden Cunningham. And then you've got Manny Choice or Manuel Choice that was visited, and it seemed like the visit with Manuel Choice went really well. It seems like Oklahoma's got 1 spot. Now, could Cunningham probably be a guy that you take no matter what? I would think so. He's that good that if he wants a spot on the roster, he'll have a spot on the roster one way or another. It seems like Oklahoma has pretty much got their just only 1 spot open, and it's first come, first serve. And I kind of look at this that maybe Oklahoma could swing Cooper Perry their way, but at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world if they don't. And it might be really hard to do so. And you've got talented wide receivers sitting there. Manny Choice might just be like, hey, I'm done. I'm ready to commit to you here relatively soon. And you're happy with it. Because Oklahoma's the wide receivers, even if they didn't take anyone else for the rest of the wide receiver class, it's solid as can all be. You can't ask for anything better than, what Emmett Jones is doing. So I just have a hard time. I don't necessarily believe that he will be a part of this class. But you never know. Visits change a lot of things. And at the end of the day, if he's visiting, there's at least a chance. But Oklahoma's well positioned no matter what ends up happening here.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It's his first time in Norman too, so very different from Scottsdale. We'll see how that works out for him.
Very different. So we'll stay on the offensive side of the ball. Another extremely talented player, 2025 4-star tight end, Lincoln Cure from Goodland, Kansas. So going back up to Brent Venables country and the great state of Kansas, the Sunflower State.
The great number state 2 tight end. Kansas. Have you ever been there?
Yeah. It's produced some good football players out of the great state.
That's fine and dandy. It's one of the worst states I've ever been to, though.
I wouldn't say it's the worst state. Have you were about to commit?
I don't think I've ever had a good time in Kansas, though.
I was going to say, you're about to commit and go up to North Dakota and live there. That might be the worst state.
I've never been to North Dakota, but they have Fargo. I've been there.
They do. That's nothing.
There's also really a movie about Fargo. Is there a movie about Kansas?
Probably.
I don't know.
Wizard of Oz, I guess.
Wasn't Dorothy? Yeah, Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz.
That's pretty iconic.
Ted Lasso's from Kansas too. They had some things, I guess, but anyway.
Someone's probably going to be like, "Why are you talking about North Dakota and Kansas? Talking bad about them?" I'm sure a couple of our viewers are from those states. Lincoln Cure, there's a little intrigue as far as whether he will be there or not. It seems like he will be, but I don't know. Similar player that was down in Florida doing 7-on-7s, recently got crystal ball to Kansas State, which honestly isn't shocking. Considering he's in Goodland, Kansas, and a hometown kid, but he put together a pretty solid stat line last year: 29 catches, 690 yards, and 9 touchdowns as a tight end as a junior. Pretty talented player. Being 6'6", this is Joe John Finley is going after. That's a big fish that he's going after, and whether or not he shows up, that's going to be really the ultimate deciding factor. Obviously, if he doesn't show up, then it seems like the recruitment's pretty much probably done. I would imagine you get a crystal ball from this weekend, Kansas State, you don't show up, it doesn't look great. Jose, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. We'll see what ends up happening with him if he gets to campus or not. I am gonna be of the belief that he will get down to Kansas or down from Kansas to Norman. Uh, the kid is very talented, but with him, he reminds me of a tight end like Caden Helms, where in the way that he was used at the high school level, just the big receiver. Plays, slot, sometimes lines up as a true tight end, but you don't really see too much of him blocking, which it's high school football. When you have a guy that athletic, that big, that can catch the football, why put him in a situation that he needs to block unless you have a Derrick Henry in the backfield, which 99.9%, probably even 100% of schools in high school football won't have a Derrick Henry like wide or running back in their backfield. So, makes sense why you wouldn't really ask Cure to block much, if at all. So that might be something that you look at and think maybe that's where a school would really need to help him in developing as a tight end. Maybe getting a little bit bigger, but as a guy that can catch the ball just as good as anyone. I actually found a different stat line. I don't know if yours is from his sophomore year, but the one that was posted on his huddle to open up his junior year highlights was 42 catches for 946 yards and 14 touchdowns. So I'm going to go with that one just because it sounds better, but you might be right. Either way, kid's very talented when it comes to catching the ball. We'll see what happens. Now, I don't think Oklahoma's too pressed on getting a tight end right now because they do have plenty of them in the room. I know we always talk about it in the offseason it being like a weak spot, but you have them. You just haven't used them, and you're always having to go to the portal for whatever reason. And it seems like health has been an issue for a couple of those guys, but hopefully they can go into the 2024 season 100% healthy.
Yeah, so before I talk about him, I'm going to take back or a little, kind of backtrack just a little bit on my Kansas statement because one of our buddies from college took me to Sedan once, his hometown of Kansas, and I had a blast there. So I have had a good time in Kansas before. But anyway, I saw the same stat line as Hose. I think the 946, 14 touchdowns. That's obviously really, really good. But what's also really interesting about him to me is he won the 3A state championship in Kansas in the 300 meter hurdles as a sophomore, and also placed 8th in high jump. So he's very athletic kid. But I kind of agree with Hose that it's the tight end room, at least going forward right now, is an area that you have a little bit of concerns with. But with Devon Mitchell going to be the tight end of the future, if you can land a Lincoln Cure here, you can kind of run a Gronk and Aaron Hernandez type situation. With with those two talented tight ends, if you are able to land Lincoln Cure. We've brought that comparison up before with Gronk and Hernandez. Obviously, we have not seen that on the field yet, but one of these days maybe. Lincoln Cure would be a lot of fun.
Gronk and Hernandez. Hopefully they could stay on the field together a little bit longer than it actually ended up.
Well, hopefully,
happening.
these guys aren't murderers. I like to think they're not, but I mean, you never know.
Probably aren't. They
probably aren't. Yeah. I mean,
I wouldn't think so.
I don't think New England thought Aaron Hernandez was a murderer either.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I wouldn't think so. Anyway, so we'll have to be watching to see if Lincoln Cure ultimately decides to show up or not. I think that's obviously the biggest storyline going into this weekend. I think he's one of the biggest targets where you just don't know where Oklahoma's really at. Moving on, we're gonna
quick on the tight end recruitment. Sorry, not what is something that Oklahoma and Coach Finley, whoever this kind of falls on, if it's Finley, if it's Latrell, if it's just the staff, or maybe they're just not prioritizing this and when it comes to recruitment this year since they got Mitchell. But the 3 tight ends that they were most likely, or the ones that they initially targeted in the 2025 class, Lincoln Cure, Deshaun Brain, and Nate Roberts, all have crystal balls to go somewhere else. Nate is crystal ball to go to Ohio State. Deshaun's crystal ball to go to Oregon. And that, like you mentioned earlier, Brum, Cure's crystal ball to go to Kansas State. Clearly all that stuff can be wrong at this point, but if any of that stuff is an indication Oklahoma isn't leading, then they either got to target, find your top two or find your top one and try to flip things around your direction, because it is a room that, for whatever reason, they keep going to the portal for as well.
Yeah. All right. That makes sense. I mean, it's going to be a position of need, and it's felt like it's been a position of need, and it seems Oklahoma's got to get something figured out here. And I don't want to go back to, I forget the kid that ultimately signed with Nebraska, that Oklahoma basically had every opportunity to take, but they didn't. I'm blanking on his name, but
Malachi
Coleman, talented tight end. It's just things like that. You just think back on, like, what if, and not saying that he's, obviously done much at Nebraska quite yet, but he could be primed to have a big year. But they did well last year with Devon Mitchell. And in their defense, I guess they were expecting for a long time that Devon Mitchell would be in this class anyway. So a little shuffling and stuff, but we'll stay on the offensive side to talk about another player, except he's now an in-state player, Caden Knighton, the 2025 four-star running back out of Wynnewood, Oklahoma. And you guys might be like, wait, what's Wynnewood, as Brandon mentioned? And that's where the Tiger King originated from. One of the greatest things that the state of Oklahoma is known for. Caden Knighton, a player that was committed to Vanderbilt early April of 2023, just recently decommitted within the last week or so from Vanderbilt, and is set to visit Oklahoma this weekend. It seems like, based on his 247 and from what I've seen, and you guys can correct me, it doesn't look like that Oklahoma has offered him quite yet. But it's interesting that he was supposed to visit the Vanderbilt on the 27th, and then before that visit, he ultimately decided to decommit, and now he's visiting Oklahoma this weekend. Oklahoma has talent at the at the running back room. They kind of hit a home run with Torrey Blaylock. It seems like he could be potentially one of the running backs. Could Caden Knighton be in this Oklahoma class and be an in-state running back that stays at Oklahoma? Potentially. And it seems like Oklahoma might have said, hey, we're ready to offer you. You have to come visit us, and we'll give you this offer this weekend. That's what I'm watching. I think Oklahoma offers Caden Knighton this weekend. Jose, do you have any thoughts?
I would agree with the offer stance. I don't know. It's interesting, right? Because he did, like you mentioned, he decommitted from Vanderbilt and almost immediately scheduled this visit to Oklahoma within a day or two, at least. That's when he made it public. So maybe he was working on scheduling it even before he had decommitted. You would assume that is a sign that Oklahoma is a big player in this recruitment, if not the leader for this running back. What's interesting is that this is a C4 athlete. Some people might remember the recruitment of Zadavian Sims last year and how that was handled and how C4 was involved in that. But this is a different situation. Could be completely different. Looking at it, seems like Oklahoma is just communicating directly with the player now. So it's interesting because that running back room, if they do end up locking down Blaylock, do you take another running back after the last two classes you've had at that position, even though you lost Smothers? It's not like you're really missing a ton of talent. If, with him gone, if Gavin leaves after next season to the NFL, you potentially still have Javonte Barnes, still have Caleb Hicks, still have Taylor Tatum, Xavier Robinson, and then Blaylock. It's a very talented running back room at the end of the day going into the 2025 season. Maybe this is a guy that is one of those NIL to supplement or to replace the scholarship opportunity. But we'll see what happens. It'll be an interesting one to follow, given that he did decommit from Vanderbilt recently.
I just think you never want to really miss out on in-state talent either. That can end up being good one day. You might as well try to get as many of them as you can. Caden Knighton's the guy that ran the ball really well Also played a little bit of quarterback. Almost had 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns. So he's dynamic in that regard. You can do some tricky stuff with him. I think him being an in-state kid, decommitting from Vanderbilt, like you guys mentioned, I tend to agree with you, Ram. I think Oklahoma's going to offer this weekend, and I think it's going to be hard for him to say no to that. These kids from smaller town Oklahoma, I guess, if you will, because I don't think Winnie was necessarily that big. I think they always end up, if they do get the offer from the either OU or Oklahoma State, if OU doesn't offer, I think they tend to end up there. So I feel pretty good about Oklahoma's chances with Cade Knighton, and it's always good to land as many as you can from your own state.
I think if Oklahoma offers him, I think Oklahoma has to be prepared to take him immediately, because I don't think he'll last long, because he knows that it's first come, first serve. And he seems like, Oklahoma's been flirting with him for a long time as far as, visiting him, and he's been visiting Oklahoma and kind of like building this relationship. It seems like Oklahoma's been talking to him a long time, and he's obviously must have grown up a Sooner fan. I mean, Wynnewood's just down 35, I-35. It's not far. So, and his family might be OU fans, and he might be as well. So it's something that I think if Oklahoma offers, they've got to be ready to take the offer. So, or take the commitment. So, talented player. And I wasn't able to find any stats for last season, 2023, but 2022, he ran for almost 2,300 yards and 35 touchdowns. So if he did anything like that in 2023, I'd say that's probably pretty good. That's not bad. And so I don't care what level of college or high school football you're at, that's still pretty darn impressive. So last guy we'll talk about, and I don't know if we've talked about him. I know I haven't been a part of any discussions because I know there's been a few videos I've missed. But shifting over to the defensive side of the ball is 2025 four-star linebacker Elijah Barnes, from Dallas, Texas, Skyline High School. Skyline High School might sound familiar to you guys with Corey Nelson, and like a Frank Shannon came from that high school as well. Oklahoma's going back to the well here. Elijah Barnes is extremely talented. As Brandon likes to say, he's got the stamp of approval from Alabama. You can only use that probably for about this class, and that's it. But last year, he ended up having 65 total tackles. And so he can kind of fly all over the field, four interceptions, 3 sacks. He's a dynamic player. And initially, when I see Alabama offered him, he's got kind of similar height and weight from the North Texas area. I kind of think of like Dallas Turner a little bit. That's just the name that comes to my mind because I remember him coming out. I think it was DeSoto. But Elijah Barnes is a big fish that Oklahoma's going after. Brandon, what do you think?
I mean, he's a tackling machine who can fly all over the field. I mean, he's a dude who also runs track. He's got good size, about 6'2", 215. You can definitely work with that. You can add size to that if you want. Maybe take away. I think with his speed, he's versatile enough to play a couple different positions on the field for Oklahoma. He's definitely a guy that can drop back in coverage with as fast as he is. But he also, I mean, he's a tackling machine. In 2022, he had 131 tackles, 15 for loss. You mentioned, over 100 again. I mean, he's solid.
Yeah, this kid's going to be a good linebacker wherever he goes, and hopefully it's Oklahoma. OU did offer him back when, Ted Roof was still the DC here. He got his offer in early December, but it seems like this is Texas's race to lose just by looking at his social media. A lot of Texas on here. Zach Alley did visit him probably about a week ago now, as of this video releasing. So we're trying to get back into this race as much as we can. He did visit Texas for their junior day back on the 20th. Seemed to have a lot of good things to say, which, not surprised. A lot of kids always have good things to say coming off of big visit days like that. So not too worried about him having a positive experience. You just got to make sure that this visit coming up for OU is just as impressive, if not more, so you can really get into the thick of it, come summertime, because that's when most of these kids will make a decision on where they're going to commit. And really, once that decision's made of the summer, for the most part, they stick to it. Yeah, you have some guys that kind of becomes a back and forth and long recruitments to follow, but I would say like 85% of these kids, once they commit in the summertime and they have these official visits lined up come May, you really have an idea of where you're at, and if you can get an official schedule with him, you like where it stands because he crashes on the ball super hard. He has good instincts when it comes to stopping the run. He just looks like a natural linebacker. He's going to be good, but when his time comes at the collegiate level.
He will be. And I wanted to fact check myself. For some reason, I thought Dallas Turner was from DeSoto High School, and I sound like a total idiot. But according to where he came from, it was actually Florida. I could have sworn he came from DeSoto, and maybe I'm thinking of another player that went to Alabama and played well. But anyway, I just had to fact check myself. So, I mean, this is Zach Alley probably trying to introduce himself a little bit to him, build this relationship. Talented player. He visited Texas. I think Texas is going to be a big thorn in our side for this recruitment, but ultimately, getting a player like him on campus is a big deal. And he could be, one of the crown jewels of this class if Oklahoma can really position themselves well after this weekend. So, but this isn't an exhaustive list of all the players. There will be more. It's just we would have to sit here for about 2 hours to do this, and I feel like 30 minutes, a little over 30 minutes, is pushing our luck with everyone. And then we're doing you guys a favor. So follow us on social media to see everything else. You guys have any final thoughts, Brandon?
So as we recorded this, it's Tuesday night, so I was watching the OU basketball game as well. They did end up beating Kansas State tonight in Manhattan. Their largest
They tried their best not to.
Their largest Big 12 road win since 2015. Apparently, they won by 20 tonight, 73-53.
That's a fun fact.
But it feels like the most frustrating 20 win of all time. I think they missed 100 free throws. That's obviously that's not official. It's an unofficial count, but it felt like 100. But they have surpassed their win total from a season ago already. They're 4-4 in conference play. Everything's ahead of them. We know how Hose feels with OU basketball. He thinks they suck. He hates them.
Biggest hater out there.
Brum and I are fans. So how far do you think this OU basketball team can go? That will be the end of video because they're probably the most frustrating team in college basketball, I think. But at the end of the day, I think sitting at 16-5 and 4-4 in conference play is not a bad place to be.
I think Oklahoma. I mean, every game in the Big 12, you're basically playing in the March Madness tournament, and I think Oklahoma can go to the Sweet 16. To be honest, I think they're good enough too.
If they can start hitting free throws, I'd agree with you because you're playing in close games and you miss 20 free throws. That's going to get you every time. It got us against Tech.
Yeah, I mean, it's true, but at the end of the day, Oklahoma is probably going to have someone from the Big 12 in their region, and because there's probably going to be about 10 teams from the Big 12 that make it, so it's going to be interesting who gets put in what region. Jose's probably thinking round of 64, and he'd probably be really happy.
Jose's thinking NIT.
Get there
missed the NIT.
Both of those would be improvements. Both of those would be improvements from last year,
you're
boys.
Saying that you think we'd be lucky to make the March Madness tournament?
I don't think lucky. I think that with how you started, you kind of expect to make it, but with how this season is looking so far in the middle part of it, not great. You don't rotate very many players. You only play 8 to 9 deep, which isn't very good. And the guys that do come off the bench barely contribute to the scoreboard.
I feel like 8 or 9 deep's actually really good.
Now, when you get to the tournament, you got to hope that you got 5 guys that can help you out coming off the bench.
How many programs actually did Kansas have play 10?
Kansas State just played 10.
Well, but they're Kansas State. They got beat. I'm talking about the teams that win it all. Are they really rotating 10 players? I don't feel like you are.
I had to look. I'll have to look again, but I bet you they're playing at least 9. And they're contributing. That's the difference. If you look at the benches that played today, I think 2 of the guys had 0 points. And 1 starter might have had less than 5. When I checked earlier, he was still at 0. You can fact check me now that the game is over, but you can't have those kind of stat lines. I think that the guys that are really good on this team are really good. They don't have more past them.
Jalen Moore's coming out big for the Sooners.
McCollum, those guys they're gonna make it to the NBA. How good they are when they get there is kind of similar to Austin Reeves, like how much work they're gonna put in, and hopefully they get their opportunities. But the rest of the guys, it's tough to say if it's the player's fault or if it's Porter Moser just gassing these kids, because it's the same situation that happened last year where OU was losing these close games. It seemed like they were just tired down the stretch. OU was a much better free throw shooting team 2 weeks ago than they have been in the last few games. So I don't know if it's fatigue or if it's, maybe they're just in a slump, and that's something that they can get figured out over the next couple weeks.
Yeah, I guess we'll see.
We had 12 bench points tonight.
Yeah, I mean, Oklahoma is a top 25 team, and they're talented. And at the end of the day, Kansas is 4-3 in the Big 12 play as well. So it's not like Oklahoma's really far off. It is the hardest league in college basketball.
It definitely is. I would agree there.
All right. Well, you made it this far. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn the notification bell on, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Apple, Spotify, and TikTok. Everything's linked in the description below. We'll catch you guys next time.